phones off.
Oh yes, so many things too. Okay. Okay, so welcome everybody. So we can see how number of participants is growing. So let's give them a few more minutes before we officially start introducing the panel. So welcome all. This is now the 8th annual summit, Global Supply Chain Management. I still remember when we had the first annual Global Summit in Supply Chain Management. So it sounds much better when we have the 8th. And for the last several years, I have been moderating the panel on sustainability. And I'm learning a lot, and I hope our audience is also learning a lot when they participate in this panel. Organizers are able to get us a very interesting and diverse set of speakers every year. So this year they also did a great job. So we have several different industries covered. And I hope that all of our participants will be able to get something interesting out of it. One additional thing is that I like about this year, so usually last few years the panel was taking place in summer, and I am teaching my half class sustainability usually in the beginning of the fall semester. So this year, actually, we managed to finish the half class. So I'm hoping some of the students who took the class will also participate and hopefully pose some questions to the session. So let me just, to start with having, I cannot do a screen sharing. I was supposed to be able to do that. Okay, so I wanted to show all the panel members with their affiliations while they are introducing themselves. However, as I cannot share my screen, let me just then call upon each of the panel member by name. We will start in alphabetical order. Just to kind of say a few words about your company and yourself to make sure everybody knows all of our speakers. So Abe, would you want to start?
Thank you very much. It wasn't that long ago that probably most of us had to explain what supply chain was to most of our family members and our friends, because I'm not sure most people really understood what we did and what supply chain meant. Fast forward 9 months and we are having to defend supply chain to almost everybody in the marketplace today between consumers and patients. Pleasure to be on the call. I'm currently the CEO for ASCM, the Association for Supply Chain Management. The organization has about 45,000 members and 300 partners in 40 countries across the globe. Our focus is on not only the individual, but on the organization and the industry as well. I'm sure most of you know the certifications, either CPIM, CSCP, or CLTD are, not only industry standards for a lot of the individuals, but we also have content for entry level as well as senior executives for organization. Our work takes us not only with large multinationals and helping them transform their supply chain, but it also focuses on implementing supply chain solutions in sub-Saharan Africa with a focus on essential medicine, vaccine, and family planning products for last mile delivery. So that's proof of concept of supply chain in that theater. Our focus is on developing a better world through supply chain, and that includes consumers and patients alike. And I think everybody now truly understands not only the value of supply chain, but also the fragility of supply chain and the various aspects of how either complicated or sophisticated most supply chains are today. So it's a pleasure to be with everybody, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Abe. So Kathy, you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm Kathy Fulton. I'm the Executive Director of the American Logistics Aid Network, and I may refer to us as Alan today throughout the call. We're actually a 501c3 nonprofit that was formed by industry organizations like ASCM in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. And our mission is really pretty simple. We want to ensure that following a crisis, that communities get the nourishment and the hydration and the medical care that they need. We do that by partnering with businesses, nonprofits, and government entities just to really unify the response efforts, bring together all of the capabilities that businesses have, while also representing to them the needs that the nonprofit community has in serving those affected by crisis. Throw in a pinch of making sure that government understands what is really happening with commercial supply chains, and how their response activities can affect commercial activities or pre-existing supply chains. And that's kind of who we are. Our mission is simple. We work to save lives using logistics.
Thank you, Kathy. So Lee, you wanna go next?
Well, I'm Lee Kinberg, and I'm Head of Environment and Sustainability for Maersk for North America. Maersk is the world's largest container shipping company and logistics integrator. And we've set a goal of net zero carbon shipping by 2050, and I can get into some of that more later. But I'd also might like to mention some of the things that we do during emergencies, following up on what Kathy said, because we work with the UN World Food Program, the Logistics Emergency Team, and others when there are emergencies to try to move those food products and so forth. So perhaps we need to talk later, Kathy.
Yeah, congrats on the Nobel Peace Prize, right?
Well, that was the World Food Program. We can't take a lot of credit. But yeah,
but they couldn't do it without logistics. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Lee. So Linda, you want to go next?
Sure. Welcome. I'm Linda Pulio, the CEO of Dishcraft Robotics. Our mission is to help the food service industry make sustainable choices. We offer a daily dishware delivery service, which is powered by dishwashing robots that we use AI, computer vision, and process automation, which sorts, washes, racks, and sanitizes dishes without any human hands touching them before they get to the chef to plate it. And our customers are corporate and hotel cafeterias, catering companies, and restaurants. When the pandemic hit, indoor dining was really shut down in the Bay Area for more than 7 months, and it's only now just beginning to come back in limited capacity. So during that time, we knew that restaurants were offering mostly takeout, which was using single-use disposables and paper containers, which created a mountain of waste. They didn't want to lose their sustainability goals, of course, but felt forced to, as this was their only revenue was takeout. And so we quickly created a service to deliver reusable lightweight containers, and they're washed hundreds of times, so diners can return them to our drop stations near cafeterias or restaurants. We pick them up and we wash them at our centralized dishwashing hub powered by robotics. And so we are able to do contactless washing and sanitizing, just the way that we do with our ceramic dishware.
Okay, thanks, Linda. And last but not least, Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather Tomley. I'm the Managing Director of Planning and Environmental Affairs for the Port of Long Beach. And the port is we are the second largest container port in North America, second to our neighbor, Port of Los Angeles. And together, a little less than 40% of the containerized imports that enter the United States come through our port complex. We have been operating as an industrial port for more than 100 years. We are a state asset that's been entrusted to the City of Long Beach through the Tidelands Trust to be operated as a commercial port. And we, as the Port of Long Beach, or the Harbor Administration, we act as the landlord, and we lease out operation of the terminals to terminal operators. So we don't actually own or operate any of the equipment ourselves. We are located adjacent to local communities, multiple local communities right next to the port area. And in the early 2000s, there was a lot of criticism that not enough was being done to address the environmental impacts associated with port operations. And so at that time, Port of Long Beach moved forward in 2005 with adopting our Green Port policy. And since that time, we have been moving forward very aggressively with implementing environmental and sustainability programs. And so we have now at this point a good track record of proven success in implementing programs to address environmental impacts. And we still have a lot of work to do, but we're continuing to move forward. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today. This is, I think, maybe my third time participating on this panel as a part of the conference, and it's always a good discussion. So thank you for inviting me back.
Yes, so I think the two of us started at the same time being on this panel. You were the guest first time I was hosting it, and I've seen you every year ever since. And actually, so let's then continue with you, because you've been here kind of several times already. And so if we have some of the repeated visitors who are in audience, they already know a little bit about some of the projects that the port was doing. And I mean, everybody in LA knows that the two ports are really big and important thing. And the theme of the summit is Future of Supply Chains Outlook to 2025. And so I thought, we would just talk about all the nice things we have planned. And then we had the pandemic coming in, and I'm sure many of the plans actually did change for quite a few of you who are attending. As Abe said at the beginning, a lot of people did not really know what supply chains are, but now they know much better about what they are and how they do. But I'm sure that also, some of the plans, some things have to be slowed down, something has to be sped up because of the change in environment. So can you tell us a little bit about how the Green Port is dealing with these changes that came because of the pandemic?
Sure, I can start with what's been happening at the port over the last several months. I think this year is, as all of us can attest, this has not been a normal year by any means. And so I think that what we've all learned to do is to be flexible and adaptable and creative and everything else to figure out what we need to do to get through all of the challenges that are in front of us. I guess to start, the port is open for business. All of our cargo terminals are open and operating. The vessels, the trucks, the trains, they're all still arriving and departing from the port. And we've been open without interruption throughout the coronavirus crisis and since the stay-at-home order was initiated. The port's identified as an essential operation to remain open, and so we've been continuing our operations. Our priority has been on the safety and the well-being of the workforce and making sure that operations can continue safely, while at the same time making sure that we're ensuring that the cargo operations can continue and we can maintain the supply chain and ensure that the everyday goods that come through the port can continue to be available. The terminal operators have increased the frequency and intensity of their cleaning efforts in all of the shared areas. They've taken steps to limit face-to-face interactions in their operations. And early on, an agreement was reached to allow the evening gates to open 1 hour later for trucks so that additional time could be spent cleaning the equipment between the first and second shift to make sure that the workforce could be protected. The Port of Long Beach has also been involved with the distribution of masks and personal protective equipment to the terminals and other port industry stakeholders and to the community surrounding the port as well. We also have opened a COVID test site in the port that's open, free, with no appointments for the port-related workers, and it's also available to the general public with appointments. Since mid-March, when the stay-at-home order came down, the port administration facilities have been closed to the public and staff have been telecommuting, but we have been keeping our operations going at full speed. During this time, the cargo volumes have been really dynamic. In the earlier part of the year, we saw unprecedented numbers of blank sailings, ships that were anticipated to come as a part of the normal schedules that were canceled. And so we had an unprecedented number of blank sailings at the beginning part of the year and significant declines in cargo volumes at the beginning of the year. But in recent months, we've seen historic highs in the cargo volumes. And this increased demand is from an increase of interest in home improvement items, home exercise equipment, some of the things that people are purchasing, and in the new way that we're all going about doing life nowadays. But also we've seen short-term increases from restocking of inventories as we have increased vessel visits trying to make up for some of those canceled voyages in the early part of the year. So I think that what we can say is what we can be certain of is that there is uncertainty, and it's difficult to be able to really predict what those ongoing impacts are going to be and what the pace of recovery is going to look like. In August 2020, our cargo volumes for the year were down a little over 1% for the same period of time in 2019. But complex-wide, together with Port of LA, we anticipate we could be down as much as 10% compared to the previous year. We've been continuing to focus on our efforts at the port. Our construction projects are still fully underway. We just opened on October 5th. We just opened the new Gerald Desmond Bridge replacement. So that's now been opened for traffic, and our other construction projects also continue. And on the sustainability front, our efforts have also been continuing as we had planned for the most part. We have no change in our environmental goals. We're continued to be focused on our long-term goals, getting to zero emissions in the terminals by 2030 for the terminal equipment and for on-road trucks by 2035. And we're navigating through the near-term disruptions and challenges that we're facing right now, but remaining to stay focused on those longer-term goals. Regulatory activities have continued. Existing regulations are still in force and are still being implemented. And also new regulations have been coming online in California. There was a recently adopted new at-berth regulation affecting the ships. An advanced clean truck regulation moved forward to require manufacturing of zero-emission trucks. And the heavy-duty engine standards for trucks also moved forward. And so there's been significant regulatory activity during this time as well. We're still moving forward with implementing our zero emission projects. We've talked in years past on this panel about a lot of the demonstration projects that we've been moving forward with to develop and demonstrate zero emissions equipment. Those projects are still moving forward. We've seen some short-term delays when manufacturing facilities have been temporarily shut, or when the operators were pausing the projects until they could implement safety protocols. However, those projects still continue and are largely on track with the same schedules that we had been moving forward with. I think the biggest impact that we have is on the delay in the implementation of our Clean Truck Fund rate. A part of our program, our Clean Truck program, a major part of implementing that program is to charge a rate on all of the container trucks that come in and out of the port, and to charge $10 per loaded TEU to the cargo owners. And the funds that would be generated through that rate would be used to help incentivize the purchase of new cleaner trucks. We had initially intended to move forward with that rate at the end of this year, but based off of the economic impacts, we're continuing to monitor what the economy looks like, what the impacts on the cargo owners look like, and when we think that things will have stabilized enough for us to be able to move forward with that rate. We're anticipating that the initiation of the rate will move forward next year in 2021. We're not wavering from our environmental commitments. We're still committed to our sustainability goals. This is similar to what we saw during the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009. We had a lot of ambitious goals with the initiation of our first Clean Air Action Plan in 2006. And through 2008, 2009, and some of the toughest times that we were facing as a part of that economic challenge, we continued to move forward with our Clean Truck program, our shore power programs. All of our environmental programs continued to move forward because we knew that what we were facing was a temporary short-term effect, and that eventually we would be back on track. And we needed to make sure that we did not lose the progress that we wanted to make on the environment and implementing our environmental programs. And the last thing I wanted to highlight, every year we do an annual emissions inventory to track our progress. And we just released the results from our 2019 emissions inventory. And what we were able to demonstrate is over the last nearly 15 years, we've been able to reduce diesel particulate matter from the port by 88%, nitrogen oxides by 58%, sulfur oxides by 97%, and greenhouse gases by 19%, all while cargo volumes were up 14%. So we're continuing to make significant progress, and we have every intention of staying on that same path to continue to make the improvements that we need to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. It's good to hear that a lot of things are still happening with the port, and especially as you mentioned, like some changes in legislations can actually work to help you. I know that me personally, I was a little bit worried how your plan to get green trucks will continue with all of these kind of closing of factories and facilities, but the pull that California is providing should help in kind of moving more manufacturers in that direction, I guess. So we actually had one of the questions on WOA asking, given that the highest percentages of waste comes from clothing and food, are there any other industries that can benefit from sustainability? And I think that, you know, just listening to what you were saying up to now can help some of our audience realize that there are a lot of industries that can get some benefits on sustainability, and not just the industry, but I'm sure if there is anybody in the audience who lives in Long Beach and has been there for some time, they will be able to appreciate all the efforts that you guys are making in kind of reducing the pollution around the port and the surrounding area. So to continue kind of looking a little bit in the similar areas, so I thought it would be good to hear something from Lee, as Maersk is kind of pretty closely related to the port of Long Beach and LA. So I know that when we talked earlier this year, so you were telling me a little bit about some of the changes that your company and your industries was facing. So can you tell us a little bit more about how pandemic impacted your sustainability efforts and your operations in general?
Well, certainly, I think Heather hit it on the nail when she talked about adaptability. And if there's one thing we've had to do in supply chains this year and in other years, but particularly this year, it's adapt and respond to customer needs, which have changed sometimes week to week. So it's been a very interesting year. That certainly impacted shipment schedules, but all of our facilities that actually handle the cargo, as Heather said, we're open for business. And of course, we've had to keep our people safe during that whole thing. So our board and our CEO set 3 major priorities to address the pandemic way back in the early spring. And those were, first, to keep our people safe. Second, to serve our customers. And third, to help our communities and society respond to and recover from this pandemic. And that has been our consistent set of priorities in every executive update and every town hall meeting throughout this whole situation. Now, our sustainability activities may not be getting quite as much press, may not be getting quite as much attention, but they are long-term goals, and we continue to track them, we continue to measure them, we continue to participate in some of Heather's incentive programs, and certainly California has continued to issue new regulations, even though it had to be done on Zoom. So those things are continuing to move forward. One of the interesting things I thought you might like to hear about is the part of the supply chain that most people see very little of is the mariners at sea. And one of the real crises that we've been dealing with is those folks live on those vessels for months at a time. But at one point, I think the number was almost 2/3 of mariners at sea were past their contract dates in terms of being able to rotate off. But with all the COVID travel bans, what could you do? How could you get them off the ships? How could you get them to their home countries? And how could you get them home? And so that's been a real focus for us is to really take care of our mariners, keep them safe while they're on the vessels calling these different ports. And that meant some new safety protocols while we're in port. But also then how do we find ways to return them home as quickly and safely as we can? So those have been real challenges. Now, I mentioned some of the long-term goals. We have committed to net zero carbon shipping. We continue to have that commitment, and we continue to track. We're down, as of the end of last year, we were down 43% in CO2 emissions per container per kilometer. In other words, per container moved. So if you emit that much less CO2, then you're also emitting fewer of the toxics that are of concern too. We've got short-term goals to reduce that to 60% by 2030 and to go to zero by 2050. Now that sounds like a distant, fluffy goal, doesn't it? But the reality is the lifetime of a vessel is 20 to 25 years if it's operating in salt water, which ours do. That means that to have a net zero carbon fleet by 2050, we have to have our first vessels on the water by 2030, which means we have to order them by 2028. So we have to design them by 2027. So we literally are making design decisions for that fleet in the next 3 to 5 years. This is not a distant, fluffy goal. This is an immediate, high-intensity activity, and we have a lot of engineers right now working on these things, but we've also said this is not something we know how to do ourselves. So we've reached out to all sorts of stakeholders asking for the opportunity to partner with them to accelerate development of the new technologies and fuels needed to make all of this happen. We also have goals in responsible ship recycling, where we're working in India to recycle ships responsibly. We are also committed to trying to cut food waste in half, or doing our part for that, between the farm and the market, where an awful lot of food is lost. And we're working to bring the benefits of trade to places where people need help to lift themselves out of poverty. So we partner with groups like She Trades and others to try to not only provide market development, but also do mentoring. And we've done training programs with She Trades so that we can help lower the barriers to export, so that these small enterprises, many of which are owned by women, have the opportunity to actually export their goods. So those are our 4 big sustainability priorities. And of course, we have the whole foundational of environment, health, and safety, anti-corruption, diversity and inclusion, and the other sustainability concerns that we all are concerned about. And they're reported annually in our annual sustainability report that's on our website if anyone wants to know more.
Thank you, Lee. And I was noticing how Heather was smiling and nodding when you were talking about your timeline, because she's also going through similar thing with the trucks. I remember when we were discussing how they have to start planning way, way before, like in order to get those green trucks, zero emission trucks in time. So it's also funny when you now mention like how you have this like She Trade. I just noticed that our panel is quite female, except Abe, who is kind of one of the male representatives. Everybody else on the panel is female. Didn't even notice it before this. So Linda, you mentioned when you introduced your company how it was really, one would think, not the best time for companies such as yours that deals with restaurants and food industry, and like the pandemic really was not very kind to this industry, but you guys managed to kind of switch a little bit, kind of going from doing just washing of existing kind of porcelain and metal utensils to kind of moving to the containers, reusable containers and so on. So it's kind of really interesting how you, in line with what Lee said, you have to be adaptable and you have to change kind of fast in order to be able to actually survive. So can you tell us a little bit about, what your plans initially were and how did it change with the current environment in which we are?
Absolutely. Originally, we are much like linen service, where we're delivering wares every day to a food service provider. We had been concentrating pre-pandemic mostly on offices and businesses, but we found that our corporate cafeterias were mostly work from home, and so that reduced our revenue to about 10% in that vertical. So what we did was, in response, we added reusable lightweight lidded containers to address really a takeout mentality now. And we added hotels, restaurants, and healthcare to our service. We developed technology which enables contactless delivery of wares so that no human hand touches the ware until the chef plates it, which is really important in today's environment on safety and health. We also added protocols that surpass health and safety regulations within the ware washing. And we really expanded our service. So right now we're pretty excited because the restaurant industry has been making huge strides in reducing plastic waste in the supply chain before the pandemic. But what happened during the pandemic is waste has gone up about 20%. And so by using our reusable service, it's really addressed this in a way that we're really hopeful that we can create a much better sustainable effort across the industry. To that end, we're working with a zero waste nonprofit upstream. They're helping us bring our reusable takeout container delivery service to restaurants around the Bay Area now. We're pretty excited. Oops. And we're also partnering with municipal governments to make our service accessible and affordable to all restaurants.
I keep forgetting to mute and unmute myself. So still getting used to it. No, so you were also when we were talking, you were mentioning how you guys were also looking in the market for like clean vehicles for doing deliveries and so on, trying to also kind of improve your footprint in that way.
Yeah, so we have worked a lot on logistics to reduce our travel. We use trucks in a very limited distance, and we find that our carbon footprint end to end, we're 95% better than the use of single-use disposables by using a reusable within the way that we operate within a very short distance.
And I think you still owe me, you said you
I know.
documentation, so I can actually see if we can push some of your service here on campus to try to reduce our impact. I'm still waiting for you to send me those. And so, Kathy, you guys actually have to deal with a lot of what we others are creating, like the climate change and everything that is happening because of practices that are not as sustainable as they should be now and in the past. Means a lot of weather and similar issues that come at the end to you to help us handle them. So how are you guys surviving this this time where there are so many people who need your help and services?
Yeah, thank you for that. Now, I'm furiously scribbling notes. I'm not texting on my phone, but all of this conversation has just been fabulous to listen to, and the threads just remind me how interconnected our supply chains really are. So before I kind of dive into how we're responding, I want to, being in Florida, I pay a lot of attention to the Atlantic hurricane season. And I heard these statistics today, and I just kind of want to share them with you because I think that for anyone who is wondering about climate change, this will really kind of send it home. So NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration looks at the period from 1981 to 2010 as their average hurricane season. And so someone put together a chart today, and every metric that they track, whether it's number of named storms, number of storm days, storms that turn into hurricanes, storms that become major hurricanes, and then something called accumulated cyclone energy. All of those are up by a minimum of like 50%. So if you look at the number of named storms, the average from 1981 to 2010 was 10.2 storms. 2020 has already had 25 named storms. Now, not all of them have made landfall, but 25 named storms still is a lot. And there's a lot of energy that goes into organizations like Lee's in planning, and navigating that, literally navigating, moving ships around to avoid things. The number of storm days, so days in which there was an active storm, average was about 49. This year was nearly 87. And then the number that really always jumps out at me is something that's called accumulated cyclone energy. It's a metric of how much energy is in the atmosphere that's being generated by storms. The average is 89. This year it's 123, and we're not finished with the season yet, right? So all of those things tell me that everything that you just mentioned about our lack of sustainable practices is really working against us. So our organization, kind of comes in on the back end. Once those disasters occur, we're there to kind of help organizations respond. Now, we do a lot of things to help with those response efforts. Everything from looking at finding free logistics services for nonprofit organizations, and we do that by working with businesses like a lot of ABES members, like Maersk, does for a lot of organizations. We're connecting the businesses to the nonprofits who are on the ground during the response. We're also doing stuff like helping businesses understand the impact of these disruptive events to their operations. We host a bi-weekly call with all of the major supply chain associations, their senior executive staff, so that they can share information, right? A lot of the practices that, warehouses had to put into place, that port operators and others had to put into place that Heather was mentioning, a lot of those were co-developed, right? One organization came up with something, another organization said, that's a great idea, we're going to share this and propagate it across the industry. And so that's another way in which we're kind of helping businesses respond. We're also providing information on these disruptive events through our Supply Chain Intelligence Center. It's a free tool that's provided by, we have a partnership with an organization called Risk Pulse. You just go to our website, allenaid.org/map. It's free, and I'll drop that in the chat so everybody can see it. And then finally, we want to make sure that government entities understand what's going on with business. And I'll talk about why all this is important. I think it was Heather who mentioned the essential workforce. Early on in the pandemic, we had a lot of, and it happens in every crisis that occurs, regardless of the cause of the crisis, government doesn't always take into account logistics and supply chain as being part of that essential workforce. For so long, supply chain to a lot of people just meant retail, right? It was just who they could see. They never thought all the way back through the supply chain to, how does that get to the grocery store shelf? And so a lot of governors throughout the pandemic were making decisions that were not necessarily good ideas to help supply chains continue to operate. And so working alongside them, working with our government partners just to say, look, we understand the need to implement some of these protocols to slow the spread of the virus, but here's going to be the impact to your supply chain. if you do that. If you close your rest stop, your truckers are not going to go into that state. It's going to be a problem. And then finally, something we do with our, and this speaks directly to sustainability, a lot of times after a disaster, organizations are really anxious to move their supplies into a community. And sometimes they want to move things from a really long way away. And so we work with them, we advise them on how to be more sustainable with their operations. You know, short haul distances, typically the infrastructure has survived, there are resources closer. So advocating for cash donations to those nonprofits so they can buy locally. You're not moving things literally across the country. You know, we get asked to do stuff all the time. Hey, can you move these 2 pallets, you know, from, you know, upstate New York over to Arizona? And the answer is, you know, unless there's no other option, the answer is probably going to be no. And someone, I don't remember if it was Linda or Lee, someone mentioned about the packaging waste. I'm sure it was probably Linda. You know, because of our work with the business community, we've really seen this dislocation that has happened across all supply chains. And it's, you know, we've moved from, you know, kind of these intermediate stops at distribution centers and then, you know, onward to retail locations or whatnot. Now we have all of these packages going every single day to everyone's homes. And so the impact of that has become immense. Well, working with our food bank partners, we're trying to help them figure out, okay, how do we, yes, we know that you can't bring people into your food pantries anymore. So how do we take advantage of routes that are already being run, so we're not adding yet another vehicle on the road to make that delivery? Can we take advantage of commercial operations? Can we partner with those last mile delivery drivers to utilize available space? So I'm going to pause there because I know we're close on time, but so much happening because of disruptive weather events that makes us less sustainable as communities.
Thank you, Kathy. And so to end with our male representative here, and we heard some stories from specific industries. You kind of stand here for the Association of Supply Chain Management. So can you give us a little bit an overall perspective? So what do you see as some of the biggest issues that came to supply chains in general, and especially in the way trying to deal with sustainability and pandemic at the same time?
Yeah, really good point. And I think what you're hearing from the other panelists are some of the challenges and, more importantly, some of the ways that they found to be innovative and still commit to the goals. And I think that's key. I think part of the challenge is, as everybody was pointing out here, is that we don't have a consistent definition of sustainability. You go into each industry and they're going to have a different definition or a different metric on how they measure sustainability. So that's the first thing that we've got to collectively start to understand in terms of what sustainability means to each of the industries, and then start to hold ourselves accountable for it. And that would include performance metrics, that we are reporting out and that we are consistently reporting out on the verifiable information on organizations on how they're doing. I think more often than not, I think we've seen organizations or industries report on what is beneficial to them as opposed to what is relevant to the consumer or the patient in the marketplace. I think we need to also, from my perspective, I think we need to pound a little bit harder on what Lee pointed out, and that is board level engagement. Too often we've seen that the boards are not engaged in discussions on sustainability and holding management accountable for the standards and the performance metrics that have been laid out for the organization. So that would include reporting and accountability for the organization in terms of what they hold themselves accountable for, and then more importantly, that they're consistently reporting to the market on how they're doing against those performance metrics. The challenge that you have is a lot of organizations, I think, have very laudable goals, But unfortunately, they don't walk the talk, as we're seeing with Maersk and we're seeing with the port and we're seeing with Linda. These organizations do hold themselves accountable. And I think too often than not, I think we've seen a lot of lip service on what sustainability means to organizations and or industries as opposed to being accountable for it, which leads to the talent side. I think we've got to pay a little bit more attention to talent development, specifically for chief sustainability officers and chief climate change officers. It was a number of years ago that we had expected to see more chief supply chain officers in organizations. It's starting to now be a recognized role within companies. I think we need to have that same emphasis for chief sustainability and chief climate change officers. We need to elevate the role and responsibility for organizations to the C-suite. Too often it's been relegated either to finance or into different departments within organizations. I think we need to elevate that focus, which would include the ability to have visibility and transparency across the supply chain. And I think too often that we've seen organizations hold tier 1 vendors accountable for their performance metrics, but not really testing the extended supply chain on their vendor's vendor and on down the line. So I think there needs to be quite a bit more attention paid to that. I also want to point out what Lee and Heather was pointing out, and that was partnerships with suppliers. Rarely do you see supply chains where it's just one organization that can have an impact. Oftentimes it is the partnerships and the suppliers within their supply chain that have the biggest impact on sustainability or the ability to affect sustainability within organizations. And then lastly, I want to focus on the global nature of supply chains. While there's quite a bit of discussion about nearshoring and reshoring, as long as consumers and the patients have expectations for readily available, high quality, and reasonably priced products, you're going to have a global supply chain. And so that's one of the challenges that we have here, is that not all parties agree, and specifically when we're talking about different regions across the globe, on what sustainability is and how important it is to either their government or to their particular population. And so we have to recognize that there are trade-offs to be made. If we are going to start focusing on electricity or on non-fossil fuel energy production, it's going to have an impact on the oil and gas industry. There's no question about it. So how do we address the trade-offs that are necessary as we start moving towards more sustainable practices and operations for organizations? And then lastly, we need a coordinated effort, and I want to sort of amplify what Kathy was saying here. Need a coordinated effort between government, private industry, nonprofit organizations, and the community. This is not a single responsibility of a private enterprise or the government or the community at large. It's going to take all players and all stakeholders within the process to not only hold ourselves accountable for what sustainability means to the organizations, but more importantly, how it impacts collectively, not only the planet, but profitability for organizations, environmental impact, as well as ethical standards that we all agree should be part of our sustainability standards. So the challenge for supply chains is that we had a fairly effective supply chain before the pandemic. It was focused on just in time. Individuals expected and received all their products, and now they're becoming much more comfortable with e-commerce. And so will that trend continue to amplify as we move out of the pandemic? So we built a very effective supply chain system for just in time. What we didn't build was a just-in-case supply chain. And what we're seeing now is the fragility of the supply chain when we see surges or when we see changes in utilization, such as food, that supply chains are going to take a little bit to respond to it. So as we start to move forward, I think quite a bit of focus is going to be had on resiliency and long-term sustainability decisions. And we hope that the decisions that organizations are making today do have a long-term sustainability focus for their organization and, more importantly, for their consumers and patients alike.
Thank you. So among the questions that we have, like one question is actually asking kind of how to build a sustainable supply chain in real life. So what would you recommend to this person?
Well, I think first you have to assess what industry that you're in. So, you know, and what are the challenges within that industry? So I would say first, get to the association industry, get to the association that represents your industry and find out what their protocols are for sustainability. That's first. Secondly, I would take a look at the UN Global Compact. There are a whole host, or, you know, there are circular economy. There are a whole host of standards that are out there. We don't need to develop a lot more. What we need to do is refine those for the particular industries that have evolved those. I would say that, you know, assess, you know, climate change officers and sustainability officers and find out from them what they consider as critical to your industry. And so I think there's quite a bit that can be done with little effort to identify what needs to be, you know, considered as part of your sustainability program. That doesn't mean that, you know, it's going to be inexpensive or easy to implement, but at least you should find readily available resources on what sustainability means to your organization.
Thank you. And so when we are talking about this, so what sustainability means to your organization, can I have each of you tell me what sustainability means for your organization? Like we can go like Kathy, if you want to.
Yeah, I think it really harkens back to, are we utilizing the resources in an efficient fashion? Are we making good decisions about how we respond after disruptive events? Are we utilizing those pre-existing supply chains rather than standing up replacement supply chains, which are far less efficient and which, you know, often do not benefit from the practice of doing them every single day. So you end up with a lot of waste. And I think that's what sustainability is really about for us.
Thank you. Lee? Mike?
And we talked about that before, about remembering to unmute ourselves. Our sustainability strategy is based on a materiality assessment and also based on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And that's a great starting point for really looking at what you need to be looking at. But then that materiality assessment is where you make it personal, where you go out and assess all kinds of different stakeholders, those who are friends of yours and those who are perhaps not friends of yours, in terms of what's important to them. And so those are tools that are pretty important. I might respond to Abe about the need to train chief sustainability officers and chief supply chain officers. There's a wonderful program called Competent Boards. And full disclosure, I'm a graduate of the program. So if you need information on that, I can put something in the chat. But it's a wonderful, like 6-month distance learning program with CEOs and practitioners and board members from around the world. So a fabulous program, and I highly recommend it. They also can be followed on LinkedIn.
Thank you. So Linda, how about sustainability for your company?
Sure. I mean, we try to live it within our company and make sustainable choices in how we behave, even corporate, as well as obviously our product is, we think makes a massive difference. And so we look at water, power, energy, fuel, every single thing that we can do that we can reduce to try to create a zero waste society.
Thanks. And Heather?
So the Port of Long Beach we're local government. We are the harbor department for the city of Long Beach. And for us, we recognize we have responsibility to the local community as well as to our customers. And so for us, we really practice the traditional 3 legs of the sustainability stool of balancing the environmental, the social, and the economic considerations. And so it's really important for us to make sure that we maintain that equal focus on each of the legs of the stool. And, you know, going through a crisis like what we're going through right now, it can put tension on that balance between the different aspects that you have to consider. And as the industry is dealing with some fairly unprecedented impacts, how do you balance the need to address their concerns while still maintaining your responsibility to the social and the environmental aspects of things as well? So I think that's really what we try to keep at top of mind as we're going through how we navigate our way through these challenges, so that we don't lose sight on how to keep everything in balance and moving forward in the way that we need to, and focused on our long-term goals.
So I actually have one related question for you. So that came from an audience member asking if you can say something about how some of the environmental measures, like the ones implemented at the container terminal, have affected labor. Do you see any pushback from the union to environmental initiatives?
So this, it's interesting. This question actually has come up, I think, on each of the panels that I've participated in each year, because it's definitely a large concern and something that many members in the labor force and in the operators continue to work through this issue. We are moving forward with environmental goals, and in many cases, we're looking at much more expensive equipment to operate. And there's a few different options for how you can move forward with those operations. I think from our standpoint, we don't anticipate there's going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to any of this. We have the example in Port of Long Beach of the Long Beach container terminal operation at Middle Harbor, where they've moved forward with a largely automated terminal to achieve their zero emission operations. But we're also heavily invested in the demonstration projects that we're moving forward with at other terminals, looking at zero emission equipment that's one-for-one replacement, traditionally operated. We think that there's going to be a mix, and I think that we, as the Port of Long Beach, we have identified our environmental goals, and we're working with the operators to move forward with achieving those goals, but we don't dictate the operations and how those operations occur. And I think that that's going to be a calculation that each operator needs to determine of what's the way that they can move forward. Again, looking at the balance of how do they achieve the economic and the environmental and the social aspect all together. How do they achieve those goals while finding that balance?
Thank you. So, Abe, you were mentioning, like, when you started talking, how one of the problems is just, how do we define sustainable, and especially how do we deal with all these global and international supply chains. So do you think can some of the international organizations help in kind of bridging this, imposing some better standards or regulations to help align the goals of different supply chain members?
Yeah, I think this is where the relationships between government and private sector intersect here, because unless we see organizations and governments willing to hold organizations accountable, I don't think you're going to see the level of participation or partnership necessary between those entities. Heather is right. I mean, the organizations need to be economically sustainable. I mean, there's no question that you have no business if you're not, in financial, positive territory. The environmental and the ethical, I think, challenges a lot of organizations on how to balance the economic with environmental and the ethical standards. To your point, with the ethical standards and labor practices, and going back to what Heather was sharing, there are very different definitions on what labor standards are across the globe. And what we consider to be unacceptable on child labor in some industries and in some regions, it is the only way a product is going to get to market. So, the cocoa industry is a great example. They've been working on this for over 30 plus years on trying to eradicate child labor out of their supply chains. this is a very tough situation because the regions that they're focused on have very little government control and very little accountability standards that organizations will hold the suppliers accountable for. And so if you want to mess with people, mess with chocolate. I think chocolate or coffee, I think, would be the two areas where you never want to have a impact on supply chain that could disrupt it. But to the point that the other panelists were bringing out, what you're seeing is that sustainability does differ. And I think it's important that within industries and within organizations, they hold themselves accountable for it. I mean, as Lee was pointing out, there are a number of sustainability indexes and initiatives out there. I don't know that we need more. The two that we're focused on are more time-based, and that is short-term sustainability versus long-term sustainability. Where short-term, how resilient are you as an organization? Can you withstand a tsunami or an earthquake in your particular region? Those are short-term resilient issues. Long-term sustainability is, water and, clean air and a lot of the carbon issues that we're dealing with. You need to balance both that short-term resiliency and the long-term sustainability that a lot of organizations hold themselves accountable for. I think this pandemic has opened up a lot of eyes about resiliency and supply chains, and more importantly, chief sustainability officers and chief climate change officers are now at the forefront of the discussions. And I think this is a long time in coming, but so necessary.
So thank you, and I would like to talk more with all of you, but we are out of time, and I got messages that we should announce the ending and go back to the main session, kind of focus remarks. So thank you all for participating. It was really informative for me, and I hope for our audience as well. And I hope to see you at next year's event in person and not like in a virtual way like this year. Thanks again.
Thank you.